This is one of a series of Good Answers presentations, offering evidence to answer skeptical challenges to the Bible's accuracy. Today we look at one of the most famous stories in the Bible, one that is often told to children. And all too often they get the impression that it's the same kind of tale as Jack and the Beanstalk. After all, it includes a giant. Where and when have we ever seen a true giant? Where has anybody seen one? So, is this, despite its presence in the Bible, just a fairy tale for children? Let's explore the question. How big was Goliath? We should begin with the account in 1 Samuel. We need to see just what the Bible actually claims about this Philistine warrior. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was clad with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a javelin of brass between his shoulders, and the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his shield-bearer went before him. 1 Samuel 17, 4-7. The specifics of this account are quite impressive. A mail coat weighing 5,000 shekels of brass, that's about 125 pounds. And a spearhead at 600 shekels of iron, that's 18 pounds, just for the spearhead. He would have to have been a big man, indeed, to wear and wield armor like that. Big, yes, but not as big as this. Though it looks as if archaeologists have dug up a monstrous giant here, we're actually looking at an example of computer image manipulation. A while back, someone held a contest. They asked for images of the most stunning discoveries anyone could imagine. A fellow with the username Ironkite won with this shot. Unfortunately, somebody surfing the internet found the picture and shared it with a friend. Then it went viral, as they say. All too many people wound up thinking it was real. An accidental internet hoax. No, Goliath was never this big. But we need some context to judge Goliath's size. How big were his fellows? There we have pretty good evidence. The average Hebrew in that time was about 5 feet to 5 feet 3. We've found many graves from the period, so that figure is fairly solid. Now Saul, however, he was bigger. As we read in 1 Samuel 9:2, he was the most handsome man in Israel, head and shoulders taller than anyone else in the land. That was one of the qualities that made him such a popular choice, at least at first. So he may have been as much as 6 feet tall, or even 6 feet 6. We don't know David's size. The Bible doesn't provide that for us, except by implication. You will recall that when he volunteered to fight the giant Philistine, Saul offered him his armor, with somewhat comic results. Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him, and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I'm not used to them." So he took them off. 1 Samuel 17, 38 and 39. So we should probably assume that David was more or less average size for his day, 5 feet to 5'3". Then there was Goliath. Scripture says he was 6 cubits and a span tall. Well, how long is a cubit? Easy enough to answer that, because we all carry a couple of cubits around with us every day, from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger. For most males today, about 18 inches. And how long is a span? There, too, you can check for yourself. Just spread your hand and measure across. About 9 inches, or half a cubit, for most people. If you're teaching your children, this is a good time to ask them, how long is a foot? The answer for many centuries would have been, depends on whose foot. Some influential person, a king or such, would be the standard. They say that Henry VIII of England finally established the foot at its present length, and since he was quite a big man himself, he wound up with the 12-inch length that all our yardsticks show. But it wasn't quite that simple in ancient Israel, because there were actually two kinds of cubits. There was the so-called royal cubit. It was used for formal purposes, such as construction of bridges or palaces, and that was about 20 inches. The other was the common cubit, the one that everybody could use in a rough and ready way, because they all had it available. On a person just over 5 feet tall, that'd be around 16 inches. Well, which of these does the Bible use when telling us Goliath's height? Since he wasn't a bridge or a palace, though he might have looked like the result of some building project, it was probably the common cubit. We all know, you see, that you don't generally go up to some really big person and say something like, "How's the weather up there?" Too much danger that they may take offense and hurt you severely. Probably, then, the best chance anyone would have to really measure Goliath was when he was horizontal. David accomplished that, of course, and so it's a fair guess that he used his own forearm to measure the guy. Common cubit. Now it's a simple arithmetic exercise. 6 cubits at 16 inches, 96 inches. 1 span at 8 inches total, 104 inches. Divide by 12, and what do we find? 8 feet, 8 inches. Give or take a bit, that's what the Bible suggests was Goliath's height. Is that even possible? Do humans ever really grow that tall? Well, yes, they do. Robert Wadlow from Alton, Illinois, died in 1940. He is pictured here with his family, Mom and Dad and 3 daughters, and he was a hair over 8 feet 11 inches tall at the time of his death, and still growing. He was the tallest man whose height was ever actually, formally verified. If we check the Guinness Book of World Records, we'll find this guy, Sultan Kösen, as the tallest living man. A native of Turkey, he checks in at 8 feet 3 inches. But do you notice something unusual about these two men? Both are extraordinarily slender. Wadlow never weighed over 222 pounds, and that's very little for someone so huge. He was extremely frail as an adult, and before his death at age 22, he was wheelchair bound. Kösen, as you see in this photo, uses 2 canes to walk. Both men achieved their height at a huge cost. Each had a problem with the pituitary gland, that gland at the center of the brain that secretes growth hormone. It's supposed to taper off its secretions when we reach our full growth. But Wadlow's was defective and continued to force him to grow. Kösen had a tumor on his pituitary gland. Revolutionary gamma knife surgery on the tumor in August 2010 finally halted his production of growth hormone, but it remains to be seen whether he will live to see age 40. So then, neither of these men could have competed with a warrior like Goliath. Are there any people today who are this big and still healthy and strong? Well, yes, but we have to reduce our expectations a bit. Tiny Sturgis is the tallest Harlem Globetrotter ever, an imposing 7 feet 8 inches. He is taller than basketball superstar Yao Ming, who is 7 feet 6, and the tallest player in NBA history is George Murasan at 7 feet 7 inches. So, the very biggest actual athlete we know is a full foot shorter than Goliath was at 8 feet 8. But surely there must be bigger potential athletes out there, mustn't there? A moment's thought will tell us otherwise. Scouts for the NBA search the world for prospects, and out of some 7 billion people, what do we find? Some very rare examples, and those a foot shorter than Goliath. Clearly, healthy people that tall, even in our age of better nutrition, just don't exist. Goliath, then, must have been a one-time freak of nature, I guess. But no, the Bible won't let us claim that. On the contrary, it tells us he was just one of whole tribes of giants. For example, the Rephaites. Deuteronomy 3:11 says, "Only Og, king of Bashan, was left of the remnant of the Rephaites. His bed was made of iron, and was more than 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. It is still in Rabbah of the Ammonites." No doubt he wasn't that tall, but a bed that size would only be needed for a giant. And do you recall the report given by the Israelite spies when they returned from scouting out Canaan? They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there." The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Numbers 13, 31 to 33. And the list goes on. In recording their approach to Canaan through Moab, Moses refers to other giants. The Emim lived there, in Moab, formerly, a people as great, numerous, and tall as the Anakim. Like the Anakim, they are regarded as Rephaim, but the Moabites call them Emim. Deuteronomy 2:10 to 11. And Joshua's successes against the giants are recorded too. "Then Joshua came at that time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all of the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua utterly destroyed them in their cities. There were no Anakim left in the land of the sons of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod some remained." Joshua 11:21 to 22. Notice the mention there of Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. Philistine territories all. And you'll recall that David's opponent was Goliath of Gath. So the Bible tells us that Joshua, during the conquest of Canaan around 1400 B.C., had destroyed most of these giants. But a few remained, and about 400 years later, David faced and killed one of those few survivors. Time for a reality check. The Bible doesn't just tell us about one freakish warrior, but rather about whole tribes or clans of giants. There were Emim, Anakim, Nephilim, and Rephaim, whole tribes that were apparently taller than anyone living today. How can we believe claims like this? Who ever heard of such big men? Answer: the Egyptians had. Note what Clyde Billington says in the Journal of Evangelical Theological Studies. The ancient Egyptians clearly knew of the Anakim giants and were afraid of them. The Anakim are mentioned 4 times in Egyptian execration texts from the Middle Kingdom period, around 1850 BC. Egyptian execration texts are generally found on broken pottery figurines. The Egyptians would make a clay model of a feared enemy with his arms bound behind his back. On this clay model, sometimes just a jar, the Egyptians would write the names of feared enemy leaders and their people groups. This clay model or jar was then baked into pottery. The Egyptians would then smash this pottery model or jar into pieces. Not in the habit of reading execration texts? Well, here's one. Part of the text translates as, "The ruler of Yanach, Aram, and all the retainers who are with him. The ruler of Yanach, Abiyamimu, and all the retainers who are with him." Now, who are these Yanach? James Pritchard, one of the greatest experts on the Near East of the last generation, explains. The present name has been related to the Anakim giants who were in the land of Canaan at the time of the conquest. We get further information about these Anakim, who were also called Shasu, from Dr. Billington. There were giant Shasu people living in Canaan, west of the Jordan River and Dead Sea, in the 13th century BC. It is almost certain that these giant Shasu are to be identified with the Anakim giants, whom the Israelite spies encountered in southern Canaan at the time of the Exodus. But how do scholars like Pritchard and Billington know about these giants? They've seen the ancient sources, of course. Not just the execration texts, though. Here is a segment from an Egyptian document often called the Craft of the Scribe. It comes from around 1250 BC, about midway between the times of Joshua and David. Part of it is a sort of travel diary, telling what the land of Canaan is like. Quote, "The face of the pass is dangerous with Shasu, hidden under the bushes. Some of them are 4 or 5 cubits nose to foot, with wild faces." But wait, these Shasu are only 4 or 5 cubits tall, not the 6½ cubits like Goliath. Not an issue, though, when we recall that this is an Egyptian document, not a Hebrew one, so the measurements are in Egyptian cubits. Now the actual size of an Egyptian cubit was 20.65 inches. So 4 Egyptian cubits would be 82.6 inches, or 6 feet 10. Those would be the smaller giants, huh? And 5 Egyptian cubits amount to 103.2 inches, or 8 feet 7 inches. There's our Goliath, confirmed by the records of the Egyptians. But if we are still a little skeptical about all this, we should visit one of the most massive monuments of ancient Egypt, Abu Simbel. That most famous pharaoh, Ramesses II, had this temple cut from the red cliffs beside the Nile. Among its inscriptions and relief carvings, there is this one, picturing his campaign in Canaan in the 1200s BC. His people had captured 2 Shasu spies and were beating them. Now you probably know that in Egyptian art, the pharaoh, and only the pharaoh, was pictured as larger than life size, and usually shown defeating his enemies. Other Egyptians, and certainly their enemies, were shown as small, except for these 2 Shasu. Even cowering under the rods of their captors, they are obviously giants. Giants from Canaan, just like Goliath. One question might still linger. If there really were humans of that size back in David's time, what happened to them? Why don't we find any today, anywhere in the human population? A little reflection should provide an answer. They were apparently a natural variation in human size. We've seen how most of them were wiped out by Joshua, leaving only a few, including Goliath. David killed him, and his mighty men took out others. Thereafter, they probably just died out. Though human DNA once contained enough variety to allow for such growth, after the last ones who had that potential were gone, so was the chance for any more. Think of dogs, for example. We now have every variety from Great Dane to Chihuahua. But if the Great Danes died off without producing pups, no amount of selective breeding among the Chihuahuas would get them back. That potential has been selected out of the Chihuahua's DNA. It seems that humans have selected out the potential for healthy gigantism. No more Goliaths. It's tempting for us in our 21st century world of science and secularism to look skeptically at some of the tales in the Hebrew Scriptures. But when we look really closely, even at a story like David and Goliath, so often reserved for the children's class in Sunday school, we find that we are not dealing with fairy tales after all. Egyptian relics, documents, and carvings all confirm that Canaan really was home to giants like Goliath. Yes, a giant Goliath, recorded for us in an accurate Bible. God's Word, after all. If you have questions about this lecture, or any of the others in the Good Answers series, you may direct them to me, Dr. Jerry C. 4 at yahoo.com.